The champagne arrived at the exact moment Anthony Russo decided his life was finally under control. He watched the waiter pour golden liquid into crystal glasses with mechanical precision, the kind of precision Anthony had built his entire empire on. Across the table, Claire Whitman smiled at him with perfectly painted lips, her diamond earrings catching the soft light of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. She was beautiful in the way expensive things were beautiful, polished, flawless, and completely strategic. Their engagement would be announced in 3 weeks. Her father, Harold Whitman, had already drafted the press release. Political legitimacy for Anthony's organization. Protection from federal investigations for Harold's network. Everyone won. Anthony lifted his glass and Claire mirrored the gesture. The crystal was halfway to his lips when the restaurant door opened. He shouldn't have looked. He never looked at arriving guests. That was a rookie mistake, the kind of distraction that got men in his position killed. But something pulled his attention toward the entrance, some invisible thread yanking at the carefully constructed walls around his chest. The glass stopped moving. The woman standing by the hostess stand had dark hair that fell past her shoulders, longer than he remembered. She wore simple jeans and a navy jacket, completely out of place among the silk dresses and tailored suits filling the room. But it was her face that made Anthony's throat close. The curve of her jaw, the way she tilted her head slightly when listening, the exact shade of green in her eyes that he'd spent 4 years trying to forget. Rachel Miller. The woman who vanished from his life without explanation, without warning, without giving him a chance to fix whatever he'd broken. Claire was saying something about seating arrangements for the engagement party, her voice distant and hollow like it was coming through water. Anthony couldn't hear her. Couldn't hear anything except the blood rushing in his ears. Then he saw them. 2 small hands gripped Rachel's fingers, one on each side. Twin boys, maybe 4 or 5 years old, with dark curls that caught the restaurant's soft lighting. One of them laughed at something the hostess said, his whole face lighting up with joy. The other stood quieter, his eyes scanning the dining room with an intensity that made Anthony's chest tighten. The quiet one's gaze swept past their table and Anthony saw it, saw himself staring back from a 5-year-old face. The same dark eyes. The same way of studying a room like it might contain threats. The same small clench of the jaw when concentrating. The realization didn't creep in slowly. It crashed through him like a car slamming into a concrete wall. Anthony gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white against the pristine tablecloth. Those were his sons. His children. His blood walking through a public restaurant while he sat across from another woman planning a marriage that would bury any chance of claiming them. Claire's hand touched his arm. Anthony, you look pale. Are you feeling all right? He couldn't answer. Couldn't form words. 4 years of questions suddenly had an answer. And that answer was holding Rachel's hands and laughing about something completely innocent while Anthony's entire world reorganized itself around their existence. Rachel's head turned. Their eyes met across the crowded restaurant. She didn't gasp. Didn't look surprised. She'd known he'd be here. She'd brought them here deliberately, and the realization sent another shock through Anthony's system. This wasn't coincidence. This was a message. Her expression remained calm, but something flickered in her eyes. Not anger, not accusation. Something sadder and more complex. Understanding, maybe. Or resignation. She held his gaze for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours, then looked away and spoke quietly to the hostess. The hostess nodded, glanced toward Anthony's table, then discreetly accepted something from Rachel's hand. I need to use the restroom, Anthony said abruptly, standing so fast his chair scraped against the floor. Claire blinked up at him, confusion crossing her perfect features. Now. Our appetizers are about to. Now. He walked toward the hostess stand with controlled steps, every instinct screaming at him to run after Rachel, to demand answers, to see his children up close. But men in his position didn't run. They moved with purpose and control, even when their entire existence was crumbling. The hostess saw him approaching and smoothly extended her hand. A folded piece of paper rested on her palm, small and white and completely unremarkable. Anthony took it without speaking and continued toward the restrooms. Once inside, he locked himself in a stall with shaking hands and unfolded the note. Rachel's handwriting, the same neat script he remembered from grocery lists and birthday cards a lifetime ago. Asterisk tomorrow. Riverside Park. Noon. Come alone. Asterisk. That was all. No explanation. No plea. Just a command written with the same quiet strength that made him fall in love with her 6 years ago. When Anthony returned to the table, his food had arrived. Claire was cutting her salmon into precise pieces, clearly annoyed by his absence. "We need to leave," Anthony said. She looked up, fork suspended midair. "Excuse me." Something came up. "We need to leave now." "Anthony, this is ridiculous. We've been here 20 minutes and my father specifically requested." "I'll call your father tomorrow. We're leaving." He threw $200 bills on the table, far more than necessary, and started toward the exit without waiting for her response. Behind him, he heard Claire's chair scrape back, heard her sharp intake of breath that meant he'd pay for this embarrassment later. But later didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the two small faces burned into his memory and the woman who'd hidden them from him for 4 years. The car ride back to Claire's penthouse was silent and cold. When they arrived, she turned to him with fury in her eyes. "You want to explain what just happened?" "Not tonight." "Not tonight?" "Anthony, you just walked out of dinner with no explanation, embarrassed me in front of—" "I said not tonight, Claire." Something in his voice made her pause. Anthony Russo never raised his voice. Never lost control. The fact that he was barely holding himself together now registered somewhere in her calculating mind. "This better not impact our arrangement," she said finally. "Go inside, Claire." She stared at him for another moment, then climbed out of the car and slammed the door hard enough to make the frame shudder. Anthony told his driver to take him home, then spent the ride staring out the window at Manhattan's glittering skyline. Somewhere in this city, Rachel was putting 2 boys to bed. His boys. Reading them stories maybe. Tucking them in. Living an entire life he knew nothing about. The question that had haunted him for 4 years. Why did she leave? Now had an answer so obvious he wanted to laugh. She'd left because she was pregnant. She'd left because his world was drowning in blood and violence during that period. She'd left because she loved their children more than she loved him. And maybe that made her the bravest person he'd ever known. Anthony's penthouse felt empty when he arrived. His security team started to follow him inside, but he waved them off. "Stay in the lobby. I want to be alone." Inside, he poured whiskey he didn't drink and stood at the window overlooking Central Park. Somewhere beyond those trees was Riverside Park, where tomorrow he'd get answers to questions he wasn't sure he was ready to ask. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to the photos he'd never deleted. Rachel laughing on a beach in the Hamptons, Rachel asleep on his couch, Rachel looking at him like he was more than just a criminal in an expensive suit. He'd told himself for 4 years that she abandoned him, that she was weak, that she couldn't handle his world. But the truth was simpler and more devastating. She'd saved their children from his world and in doing so, probably saved their lives. The night passed in fragments. Anthony didn't sleep. He sat in his leather chair and watched the city lights blur and sharpen while his mind replayed every moment from the restaurant. The way the quiet twins scanned the room. The way the loud one laughed without fear. The way Rachel held their hands like she was the only barrier between them and something dark. And she was. That something dark was him. At sunrise, Anthony showered and dressed in civilian clothes. Jeans, a plain shirt, no tie. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. When had he become someone his own children needed protection from? His phone rang at 8. Harold Whitman's name flashed on the screen. "We need to talk about last night," Harold said without preamble. "Claire called me very upset." "Tell Claire I apologize." "Anthony, this alliance is important. We can't have you acting erratic." "I'm not being erratic. Something personal came up." "Personal?" Harold's voice sharpened. "You don't have personal, Anthony. You have business. That's what makes you reliable." Anthony closed his eyes. "I'll call you tomorrow." "You'll call me today or—" Anthony hung up. At 11:30 he left his building alone, ignoring his security team's protests. He took a taxi to Riverside Park and arrived 15 minutes early, scanning the area with practiced eyes. Families on blankets. Joggers on paths. Dog walkers and tourists and normal people living normal lives. Rachel sat on a bench overlooking the water. The twins played on the grass nearby, throwing a ball back and forth with clumsy enthusiasm. Anthony approached slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. Rachel looked up when his shadow fell across her. You came alone. You asked me to. I wasn't sure you would. She gestured to the bench. Sit. He sat, maintaining distance between them. Up close, he could see the small changes 4 years had carved into her face. Tiny lines at the corners of her eyes, a hardness in her jaw that hadn't been there before. Motherhood and secrets had reshaped her into someone stronger. They're beautiful, Anthony said quietly. Yes, they are. What are their names? Ethan and Lucas. Rachel nodded toward the loud one. Ethan's the troublemaker. Lucas is the thinker. Lucas looks like me. They both look like you. Ethan just hides it better with his personality. Silence stretched between them, filled with 4 years of questions. Why didn't you tell me? Anthony finally asked. Rachel turned to face him fully. Because the week I found out I was pregnant, 3 of your men were killed in a warehouse fire. Because you came home covered in someone else's blood twice that month. Because I watched you turn into something cold and violent, and I knew I couldn't raise babies in that world. You should have let me choose. You already chose, Anthony. You chose that life a long time ago. The accusation stung because it was true. He'd inherited his uncle's empire and expanded it, told himself he was protecting people, building something. But he'd never questioned whether it was worth protecting. Never questioned what it cost him. Why now? He asked. Why let me see them now? Rachel was quiet for a long moment, watching the twins play. Because they're starting to ask questions about their father. Because I'm tired of lying to them. And because... She paused. Because I saw the engagement announcement. You're marrying Harold Whitman's daughter. It's business. Everything with you is business. Rachel's voice hardened. That's the problem. Ethan ran over, breathless and grinning. Mommy, Lucas won't let me be the superhero. He stopped short when he saw Anthony, his small face suddenly cautious. Lucas appeared behind him, quieter, his dark eyes studying Anthony with unnerving intensity. Boys, Rachel said gently, this is someone Mommy used to know. His name is Anthony. Ethan recovered quickly, extending a small hand. Nice to meet you. Anthony shook it carefully, terrified of gripping too hard, of doing something wrong. The boy's hand was so small in his, so fragile and trusting. Lucas didn't offer his hand. He just stared at Anthony with those knowing eyes, and Anthony wondered what the child saw. If he somehow recognized the monster sitting on the bench. Can we get ice cream? Ethan asked Rachel. In a minute, baby. Go play a little longer. The twins ran back to their ball and Anthony exhaled slowly. They don't know. No. And I need to decide if they ever will. Rachel turned to him. I didn't bring you here for closure, Anthony. I brought you here to be clear about something. You don't get to be halfway in their lives. You don't get to show up for birthdays and disappear for months. You're either their father or you're nothing. There's no middle ground. What are you asking me to do? I'm not asking you anything. I'm telling you how this works if you want to know them. She stood, gathering her jacket. Think about what kind of man you want to be. Then let me know if that man is someone they should meet. She called to the twins and they came running, Ethan chattering about ice cream while Lucas cast one last look at Anthony over his shoulder. Then they were gone, walking down the path toward the park exit, and Anthony sat alone on the bench with the weight of an impossible choice pressing down on his chest. His phone buzzed. Claire's name appeared with a message. Dinner tonight. My father will be there. Don't embarrass me again. Anthony stared at the message for a long time. Then he looked at the empty path where his sons had disappeared. The choice wasn't impossible at all. It was the easiest decision he'd ever made. And the most terrifying. The emergency meeting took place in Harold Whitman's office. A sterile space of glass and steel that reflected its owner's personality perfectly. Claire sat beside her father, perfectly composed. Anthony stood by the window watching the city below. Word travels fast in our circles, Harold said without preamble. You were seen with a woman and 2 children yesterday. Want to explain? Anthony turned to face them. They're my sons. Claire's expression didn't change, but her knuckles whitened around her glass. Excuse me. The woman I knew 4 years ago. She was pregnant when she left. I have twin sons. Harold leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. And you're just learning this now? Yes. Does this woman want money? Is she making demands? No demands. She wants nothing from me. Then what's the problem? Claire asked coldly. You have children. Men in your position often do. We can make arrangements. Discreet financial support, perhaps a trust fund. But Anthony, this can't interfere with our arrangement. Anthony looked at her carefully. And if I want to be in their lives? Then you'll do it quietly, Harold said. The engagement stands. The alliance stands. Your personal entanglements don't change the business realities we're all navigating. What if I don't want the engagement to stand? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Claire stood slowly, her voice dangerously quiet. You don't get to decide that now. Contracts have been signed. Announcements have been prepared. My father has made promises based on this alliance. Then your father will have to break those promises. Harold rose from his chair, and suddenly Anthony understood why this man had survived 40 years in politics without a single scandal touching him. The mask of civility dropped, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Let me be very clear, Anthony. If you walk away from this alliance, you lose my protection. Every investigation we've buried, every prosecutor we've influenced, every federal agent we've kept at bay, that all disappears. Within 6 months, you'll be indicted on a dozen charges. Your organization will fracture. Your enemies will smell blood in the water. I understand. Do you? Harold moved closer. Because I don't think you do. This isn't about love or family or whatever romantic notion you've constructed. This is about survival. You walk away from my daughter, you're signing your own death warrant. Anthony met his gaze without flinching. Then I'll die with my conscience clear. Your conscience. Claire laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. Since when do you have a conscience? You're a criminal, Anthony. You've spent 15 years building an empire on violence and fear. Don't pretend these children have suddenly transformed you into someone noble. He was right. He wasn't noble. But maybe that was exactly why he needed to walk away, because his sons deserved better than a father who sacrificed their future for power. I'm sorry, Claire. The engagement is off. He turned toward the door. You're making a mistake, Harold called after him. Those children will watch you burn for this choice. Anthony paused with his hand on the doorknob. Then at least they'll see me burn for something that matters. He left before either of them could respond. The war Harold promised arrived faster than Anthony anticipated. Within a week, 2 of his lieutenants were arrested on federal charges. Within 2 weeks, a major shipment was seized at port. Within 3 weeks, rival families started testing his borders, sensing weakness. But Anthony had been preparing for this moment since the night he saw his sons in the restaurant. He met with his most trusted advisor, Vincent, in a secure location outside the city. I need you to do something that's going to sound insane. Vincent, who'd known Anthony since childhood, just raised an eyebrow. When has our life ever been sane? I want you to dismantle the organization. Piece by piece. From the inside out. You want me to what? Harold Whitman is going to destroy us anyway. But if we control the collapse, we can direct the damage where it matters. Leaked evidence. Selective cooperation with investigators. Hand everything to the Marconi family. They're sloppy enough to fall apart under scrutiny. Vincent stared at him like he'd suggested burning down the entire city. Anthony, what you're describing is organizational suicide. I know. You're talking about decades of work. Your uncle built this empire from nothing. And I'm going to be the one who ends it. Anthony pulled out a folder thick with documents. These are locations, accounts, operations. Everything federal investigators would need to gut our organization and everyone connected to it. Including you. Especially me. Vincent took the folder with shaking hands. Why? Why destroy everything? Anthony thought about Ethan's laughter. About Lucas's careful eyes. About Rachel's ultimatum. You're either their father or you're nothing. Because I want my sons to know their father chose them over power. Because I'm tired of building something that only creates fear and death. Because if I don't walk away now, I never will. The next 3 months were chaos. Anthony systematically destroyed what he'd spent years building. Evidence reached the right people at the right times. Key operations collapsed under investigation. The Marconi family eagerly seized territory, unaware they were inheriting a poisoned kingdom. When federal agents came looking for Anthony, he was already gone. Vanished into a new identity crafted by the same forgers who'd created dozens of covers for his operations. The media called it the biggest organized crime collapse in a decade. Harold Whitman survived as men like him always did. Claire married a Wall Street executive 6 months later. The Marconi family fractured under investigative pressure within a year. And Anthony Russo disappeared from the world he'd known his entire life. The small town in Indiana had one main street, 2 coffee shops, and absolutely nothing in common with Manhattan. Anthony, now living as Michael Torres, worked for a logistics company, managing shipping routes from a modest office that smelled like coffee and old paper. He lived in a rental house with a yard and neighbors who complained about leaf blowers on Sunday mornings. It was peaceful. It was boring. It was everything he never knew he wanted. Rachel didn't contact him for 4 months after the news broke about his organization's collapse. When she finally called, her voice was cautious. "Is it true? Are you really out? Completely? Where are you?" "Somewhere safe. Somewhere normal." Silence on the line. Then, "The boys ask about you sometimes. Ethan wants to know why the man from the park never came back." Anthony's chest tightened. "What do you tell him? That you had to go away. That maybe someday you'd come back." Rachel paused. "Did you do this for them?" "Yes." "Anthony." Her voice cracked slightly. "Destroying your entire life for children you barely know. That's insane." "I didn't destroy it. I traded it. There's a difference. Lucas drew a picture of you yesterday. From memory. He's never met you properly, but he captured your eyes perfectly." "Rachel. Give me your address. We'll come visit. Just for a weekend. Let them decide if they want to know you." 2 weeks later, Rachel pulled into his driveway with the twins in the back seat. Anthony watched from the window, his heart racing faster than it ever had, facing down rival families or federal raids. Ethan bounded out of the car first, full of energy and questions. Lucas followed more slowly, studying the house and yard with those careful eyes. "You have a trampoline," Ethan shouted, spotting the backyard. "I do," Anthony said, meeting them on the front walk. "You can use it if you want." Ethan was already running. Lucas stopped in front of Anthony, small face serious. "Are you our dad?" he asked quietly. The question hit like a bullet. Anthony knelt to the boy's level, meeting those eyes that mirrored his own. "Yes. If you want me to be." Lucas considered this. Then, without warning, he wrapped his small arms around Anthony's neck in a fierce hug. And Anthony Russo, who'd faced down corrupt politicians, ruthless criminals, and his own dark legacy, broke down crying while holding his son for the first time. The weekend stretched into a week. Then 2 weeks. Rachel found a remote job that let her work from anywhere. The twins started attending the local school. Anthony taught Lucas chess and helped Ethan build elaborate forts in the backyard. One night, after the boys were asleep, Rachel found Anthony sitting on the back porch, staring at the stars. "Having regrets?" she asked, settling beside him. "About what?" "Everything you gave up. The power. The money. The life you knew." Anthony thought about his penthouse overlooking Central Park, the restaurants where people trembled at his name, the empire built on fear and violence. Then he thought about Ethan's laugh when they played catch. About Lucas's careful questions during bedtime stories. About Rachel's hand in his while they watched their sons play. "I gave up being a king," he said finally. "But I got to be a father. That's not a trade. That's a miracle." 6 months after leaving New York, Anthony walked the twins to school on a Tuesday morning. Ethan chattered about a science project while Lucas walked quietly, his hand warm in Anthony's. Rachel walked on his other side, no longer the woman who'd fled in fear but a partner who'd given him a chance at redemption he never deserved. Other parents waved as they passed. Mrs. Henderson from the corner house called out about a neighborhood barbecue that weekend. Mr. Chin asked if Anthony wanted to join the volunteer fire department. Normal things. Safe things. Things that would have bored him senseless 5 years ago. Now they felt like treasures. At the school entrance, Ethan hugged Anthony quickly and ran inside. Lucas lingered, looking up with those serious eyes. "Will you be here when school ends?" he asked. "Every day," Anthony promised. "I'm not going anywhere." Lucas smiled, a rare, brilliant thing, and followed his brother inside. Rachel took Anthony's hand as they walked back toward home. They walked the rest of the way in comfortable silence, and Anthony thought about the man he'd been. The one who measured success in territory controlled and enemies eliminated. That man wouldn't recognize the person he'd become, pushing a cart through a grocery store and coaching Little League and sleeping without guards outside his door. That man would think he'd lost everything. But standing in his small kitchen while Rachel made coffee and the morning sun streamed through ordinary windows, Anthony understood a truth that had eluded him for 35 years. Walking away wasn't surrender. It was the bravest thing he'd ever done. And for the first time in his life, Anthony Russo was finally, truly free. This powerful story teaches us that real strength isn't found in power or control. It's in having the courage to walk away from everything when love demands it. Anthony's journey shows that true redemption requires complete sacrifice, not half measures. You cannot build a new life while clinging to your old one. The story reminds us that legacy isn't about empires or fear. It's about the choices we make for the people we love. Children don't remember how powerful you were. They remember whether you chose them. Most importantly, this story proves it's never too late to change direction. No matter how far you've traveled down the wrong path, you can still turn around. Sometimes the bravest battle is the one you refuse to fight, and walking away can be the hardest and most heroic choice of all. Parenthood has a way of revealing our true priorities, stripping away everything except what genuinely matters. And when faced with that clarity, the question becomes simple. Will you choose power or love? Will you choose fear or freedom? Anthony Russo chose love. He chose freedom. And in doing so, he discovered that losing everything can mean gaining what truly matters. Thank you for watching.